Not quite the image that they wanted to give out, perhaps. Let's discuss these papers in a bit more detail with Alpesh Patel from Parthenium Partners. Thank you very much for coming in. Well, a mixed bag of stuff today. Where do you want to kick off?
We're starting off with the Greeks. You know the new joke, don't you? A Greek, a Portuguese, and a German goes to a bar and the German pays. And actually, that's the attitude the Greeks should probably take with their debt, which is, we're not going to pay. We're not going to have death by 1,000 cuts and rumour after rumour after rumour whether we're going to default or not. They should just say, you know what, we've got big neighbours. We got into this mess. We didn't realise what a big mess we were getting into. It's not entirely of our own making. We're just not going to pay and stuff our citizens.
Germany's preparing for this eventuality anyway, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. They've got the largest economy in the EU. They can afford to foot the bill, and they were the ones driving the experiment. And let's not forget why the EU exists in the first place. It had a little bit to do with Germany to begin with.
But taking it back to the actual story, what they're focusing on is this email which allegedly came from Citigroup. Isn't this a bit like shooting the messenger? Because what the message was actually saying is no different to what's been said for quite some time, the possibility that Greece may default. So why bother to actually investigate and threaten to use the cyber police?
If this email has come through, you know, Citigroup and all the other investment banks which are mentioned, you know, in the email trail, it makes you wonder, you know, investment bankers involved in market manipulation? Surely not. And that's the problem. It's not that they're sending an email about what might be happening or might not be happening. Your suspicion is they're trying to trigger some kind of market reaction and profit off the back of it. Just a suspicion. I don't know where I could have got that idea from.
No, I don't either.
No.
Should we, let's go on to the concern within the Eurozone about the Finnish involvement.
Yes, well, the story on the International Herald Tribune is the fact that the Finns have traditionally been the most pro-European. And of course, Europe has a history, doesn't it? When the debts start rising and inflation starts going up, you start blaming your neighbours and you start blaming the immigrants. And it has a history going back well before the EU of this. And as I said before, the EU was set up to try and stop some of this infighting. Now we're fighting about the organisation which was set up to stop the infighting about our neighbours and immigration.
And what sort of break could the Finns possibly put on this, you think, in terms of bailouts?
Well, what you're seeing is you've had more votes in favour of the True Finn party, which is anti-EU, anti-immigration type of party, and more of a swing to the right. You could get the government calling a referendum. I don't think it'll get to those kind of extreme levels. Of course, you could envisage a situation where they say, well, we don't want to be part of all of this. That's not going to happen. These are protest votes. It's clear that you've got a larger proportion of the population willing to make these protests, but we haven't seen the levels where people are saying we want to be out of the EU.
OK, moving on now, geopolitical issues, something to focus the mind. The possibility of protests on this Good Friday in Syria.
Yes, what I find interesting about this story, it's in the Gulf News, and it's front page. It's front page Gulf News, which is published out of Dubai, about protests. Now, the Gulf area newspapers don't necessarily have a record for putting front and centre stories about local dissent or dissent in the region, let's put it that way. So that was interesting. What's also interesting is that how the protests in Syria have been organised. It's been via Facebook, as we've seen around the world. So the Americans have actually managed to do what the CIA's been trying all along, which is get revolution in these areas. It's just that it was Mark Zuckerberg and not somebody out of Langley who did it, which in itself is also incredibly impressive. But yes, that's what we're waiting for. I suppose in downtown Damascus, they're getting ready if it's going to happen. So we'll have to wait and see.
I think it's not just there; it's Homs and places as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it is supposed to be spread.
These are.
You've got to remember, it's a lightly populated country. I mean, you're only going to see sizable protests in somewhere like the capital because the other places just don't have the numbers.
And what happens in Syria, I mean, has just that huge knock-on effect for Lebanon and all those other areas as well.
Well, it does tend to incite. You do tend to get in other countries groups saying, well, look, If they can do it, this is how we organise it. This is what we do, and let's get protesting. The issue is what then happens, if anything. Does it fizzle out? And we've seen things fizzle out all the way from Tiananmen Square. We've seen things fizzle out for one reason or another, not necessarily any fault of the protesters themselves.
OK, that's Gulf News.
Yeah, and it's now turned the Moscow Times, in fact. One of the stories that you've highlighted is that this claim that the son of a software entrepreneur has been kidnapped.
Well, it's worrying in two regards. One is, Russia has so much potential, obviously, as an economy, and has achieved so much of that potential. But crime, I keep on hearing in the business community, we're not going to do business in Russia because of crime and the fear of safety. Of course, that happens in many countries around the world. Of course it does. But it's disappointing when it happens in a country which has so much potential. The other solution with this is, if he is worth $800 million, if the son has been kidnapped and they're asking for $3 million, you pay the $3 million and then you pay another $3 million to a group of people to go find the kidnappers and make sure on behalf of all other business people that this will never happen again.
This hasn't been confirmed, though, by the authorities, and presumably that is normal in these scenarios, isn't it, in terms of a very high-profile person being taken?
Yes, from what we know, around the world, there tends to be standard practice with these things. And I suspect the Russian authorities are as good as anybody at tracking down kidnappers, because obviously it's something which does tend to happen, unfortunately, in the country.
OK, moving on now to the South China Morning Post, and this is a crackdown by the authorities cancelling cultural events.
Well, China has a tradition, of course, of associating culture with revolution, hence the Cultural Revolution. But come on, really, how subversive can modern art possibly be? Do you understand modern art? If you can't understand the damn thing, how can you be subverted by it?
I think it's open to interpretation.
Well, yes. Well, on that basis, it could be pro the country, or it could be subversive.
Look at the reach, though. Look at the penetration of something like Weiwei, for example, and what the fact when they clamp down on him. Just look what penetration that gets internationally.
Well, what we learnt in the West, which they haven't quite grasped in China, which is, if you didn't clamp down on it, if you didn't arrest him, if you didn't do all of these things, it wouldn't have made the front page of the news. Instead, let them do it, and all the noise means it always gets pushed back to the papers if it was in the West. And maybe that will sort of occur to them that the best way to suppress people is actually just let them talk, because it just gets drowned out in the noise.
One very last one, I think we've got time for.
Very, very briefly.
Is it Van Rouge?
Van Rouge, very, very briefly,
Yeah.
in less than 30 seconds.
Just
Well, I love the quote. It's truncheon happy meatheads, as opposed to cheese-eating surrender monkeys.
OK, we'll leave it there. Alpesh Patel, thank you so much for joining us.
thank you very much indeed for that, and thank you for watching us today as well.